what am I really feeling? What is my perspective? What is my need? What is my want? That is myself that I'm trying to meet. So many of us we have habits in those areas. We're saying what we think others want to say. We're suppressing our emotions because it wasn't safe in our childhood. We don't even stop to ask ourselves what we want or what we need because we're so worried about what everyone else wants or needs from us. So this is where I think I frustrate people often, where there isn't a 1, 2, 3 steps of meeting yourself, because it really is that journey of first being witness to what we're not.
2, 1, 0.
Hi, and welcome to Stellar Life Podcast. This is your host, Orion. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you for improving yourselves. Thank you for listening to my podcast and listening to the amazing guests and the wisdom and taking care of yourself, because you matter and you are important. So just give yourself a little pat on the back right now and say to yourself, I am so great. And thank yourself for wanting to improve and wanting to just be a better person. It's such an important quality. And, you're going to look back in a few years from the future and you won't even recognize the person that you've become, because everything is going to just be bigger and better, and your inner evolution is going to be so wonderful, and life will be just better and more beautiful every day. Today I have with me Dr. Nicole LePera. She is a holistic psychologist trained at Cornell University and New School for Social Research. She leads the Self-Healer movement, an international community of people joining together to take healing into their own hands, and you can use the hashtag self-healers to find more about them. She is the author of #1 York Times Bestseller, How to Do the Work, and just released her new workbook, How to Meet Yourself, the workbook for self-discovery. My favorite thing about Dr. Nicole is how, regardless of her fame and success, she's so kind and easy to talk to and down to earth. I love the conversation, and I really love that idea of improving oneself every day and going deeper and figuring out who you really are. You don't need to be like anybody else, because you are a beautiful, unique snowflake and a beautiful creation just the way you are. And now, without further ado, on to the show. Hi, Dr. Nicole, and welcome to Stellar Life Podcast. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much for having me, Orion.
Yes, before we begin, can you tell me a little bit about your origin story and how did you become a holistic psychologist?
I think, as is the case for a lot of us on a journey of sorts, my shift into becoming that which is known as a holistic psychologist now was really informed or led by my own healing journey. And on a personal side of my life, for as long as I can remember, I'm someone who really struggled with anxiety. And I think that, coupled with kind of intrinsic or an innate desire to understand myself, of course, first and foremost, understand other people, led me into the career path of becoming a psychologist. I thought that is how I would not only gift myself and those working with me this insight, but my hope was also at the same time to relieve suffering that I myself had experienced. And several years into opening up a practice, I was living in Philadelphia at the time and continuing to struggle with lifelong anxiety myself. I started to feel really disempowered with the work that I was doing, with the clients that I was seeing at that point quite consistently, some for several years. And what I kept being met with is reports of feeling of being stuck, not relieving suffering, a lot of repeated habits and patterns, and was seeing a lot of the similar in my own life. So for me, really seeking to understand, not from a place of feeling good, I think is the case for most of us. We determine we need to shift or do things differently when we're in that depths of suffering and feeling disconnected, really unfulfilled from the life I created, is really what led me to understand first why it is that so many of us are universally stuck, and then began to create change, honoring the body holistically and really using the tools that now I talk about as the holistic psychologist day in and day out on social media.
And how did you start your journey? So one day you woke up and you're like, this is not working. It's only a piece of the puzzle. It's not the whole thing. I need to seek more. Like, what was the journey like? Where did you go? Where did you even start?
So I would kind of clarify by saying it absolutely wasn't a one moment incident for me. It was, as I kind of see it and experienced it, it was kind of a gradual kind of descent into that knowingness. It wasn't kind of a moment in time, though I write about particular moments in my first book, How to Do the Work, where there was kind of a several month period where I started to feel really upset, really dysregulated, really low. And so for me, it was beginning again to become consciously aware of why that might be. And that was really led by new information. I, as I think a lot of us do, went to Google to diagnose like what was going on with me. Why was I having so many now physical symptoms and in addition to the anxiety that I'd always experienced? And when I thought I was going to be met with, a diagnosis of something medically wrong with me, I was actually gifted with some new science. The science of epigenetics is what I'm referring to, but the possibility of shifting and changing what for many of us believe to be kind of ingrained or DNA genetic driven circumstances, anxiety being one of them. So for me, my journey wasn't a moment of realization. It was kind of gradually learning new information, applying it in my own life, and began, as I will always cite the beginnings, with the foundation of becoming conscious, of seeing the habits, the patterns, what was kind of creating the life that I was living day to day. That, in my opinion, is always the basis of change, because we can't make new choices until we see what for many of us are the choices that autopilot or that habit self is making for us day in and day out.
And what type of new modalities did you study?
So for me, it was, the big new piece that is foundational, again, in my opinion now, and will remain foundational, is the piece of the body. Coming from the clinical training, very traditional program, really emphasized the mind. I learned a lot about the gold standard in mental health treatment, which is cognitive behavioral therapy, which really emphasizes or puts the priority on our thoughts. And I, of course, believe and devoted an entire chapter in How to Do the Work to the power of our beliefs or our thoughts, though what I came to see was missing and was incredibly problematic that it was missing was the body. So for me, it was not only building on this foundation now of conscious awareness, where I could begin to show up and make new choices. The choices that I was particularly interested in making for myself were based in my body, learning how to regulate my nervous system in particular. So that looks like paying attention to what I was eating, how I was eating, paying attention to how much I was allowing my body to rest, what sleep looked like. On the other side of that, then, of course, what movement looked like. And naturally just paying attention to my body's normal rhythms, like my breath. Is my breath nourishing and deep, and do I feel alive with energy and grounded and present? Or what I came to realize is I was very disconnected. I was living in a very dysregulated body. So really staying committed to those daily choices to care for my body differently is what literally changed my life or allowed me to change my life, I should say.
I love what you said about connecting to your body. I had a whole journey of connecting to my femininity, because I got very hurt in an abusive relationship, and then I became very masculine, and I was even I had a hard time even getting into a relationship, because I would put down all the guys that I would date, because I wanted to make sure that I won't get hurt. And for me, being embracing my feminine side was weak. Being feminine was weak. It was not something that I wanted to do. But then I had a whole journey with Sheila Kelly. I studied pole dancing with her, and the way she teaches it is more as a journey into self, and you emote through the body and you connect and you listen to her. And when you dance your emotions. Some dances were rage and some dances were being elated, and a lot of my healing happened through music, through movement, through my body. Because you're right, we're not just of the mind. It's so easy to get stuck in our heads, especially because we're so stuck with our screens all the time. It's always thinking, 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 and we don't even take the time to just pause and breathe. And we are everything, like you said. It's holistic. We're not just one thing. We are both mind and body and spirit, good and bad, all of it. And embracing everything that we are is the key to a more fulfilling life.
I couldn't agree more, and I appreciate, Orion, you sharing aspects of your own journey. And the reality of it is, our body is participating in the way we navigate our emotions, the way, how connected we feel to even who we are, how connected we feel to those around us. And the large majority of us, at least in my opinion, who didn't have physically or emotionally safe and secure early environments where all of the learning happens. I mean, we come here and our main task is really to learn, how to care for our bodies, how to navigate our emotional worlds, how to connect with other people. And when our early environments and our relationships in particular lacked that safety and security, much like you described, having this, being a part of this emotionally, or this abusive, I should say, relationship, right, caused a pain, or what we would label in the field a trauma, right, in your mind and body, that no matter how distant you are in terms of years, geographic location, even point of contact with this other individual, and for most of us, this includes our parents, our earliest relationships, we are still carrying the imprint of that in our subconscious mind, which is wired quite literally to avoid possible future hurts or harms. And then from that protective stance, like you're describing, we do adapt or modify ourselves. So using your example, right, I became more masculine out of this protection to keep people away, because when someone got close and vulnerable, I was violated. There was trauma that I lived in that experience.
It's like a thick shield that we put on, whether it is in relationships or with anything in life. We get hurt, we put on all those layers, and then we don't understand why we're so stuck and why it's so hard to move forward, because we are carrying this heavy armor on, not even knowing that we don't need it anymore.
Yes. And that was the point. My hopeful takeaway of the first book, How to Do the Work, my hope is that readers of that really will be introduced to that separation, that armor that you're beautifully, wisely describing. I would call it the habits, all those ways we've adapted to these early hurtful moments or experiences or environments or relationships has become our conditioning. And many of us, like you're describing, we walk into our future and we begin to believe, because all of these habits are operating outside of our awareness, that this is just who we are, right? I'm a person who can't have a relationship. I'm distanced from other people. Though really that distance is real, but it was born out of a protection, not necessarily any statement of you, your worth, or your value, or your deservability even to be in those relationships that you've learned to avoid. So my hope of all of the work is really to give people information to create that separation, because so many of us are identifying with our habits, with all of these ways that we've had to adapt to survive. And then we really are limiting ourselves. We're feeling really unworthy, and we're continuing then to repeat those patterns, which sadly are only affirming how unworthy we feel. Though again, when we create a little space and we begin to observe from that conscious state that I was describing earlier and see these habits in action, now we can have the possibility of not only creating that separation where we don't become our habits, they are of no reflection of our identity, but then we actually have the space to begin to make new choices, to break those habits and to create new habits, so that somewhere down the line, I actually get to feel and experience myself now anew, different from how I used to be.
The first step you said is awareness. I see my habit, therefore I can change it. And then what?
So I see my habit, I can change it. And I want to emphasize the active nature of this practice, learning how to be in that conscious state. And of course, we can't just like a light switch. We don't just turn on our consciousness and never turn it off. I like to, though, directly state that, because I think a lot of us do have that expectation or belief. I've heard about consciousness, or I've tuned in right to my conscious awareness, which really just means I'm present in my body. I feel what it's like to be sitting in this chair with these lights on me. I can feel my heart rate. I can feel myself. I'm in that conscious state of awareness. When we touch that moment, so quickly, so often we go right back into that autopilot. So I want to emphasize the action of creating those conscious moments throughout our day, because it isn't like, oh, I'm conscious now, I'll be conscious for the rest of my hours today. No, I can just as easily go back into my habits, and I often do. So learning how to be conscious is really an action. It's a challenging action. I think that's also important to note here. When we're beginning to pay attention, usually what we're met with is uncomfortable things, right? Uncomfortable thoughts in our head, uncomfortable feelings in our body, which is even more of a reason to go right back into those habits where I've learned, many of us, to be really savvy and learn to keep them below the surface, or to keep my attention distracted outward, maybe even with all of the to-do list, right, that I have to do, maybe even distracting myself in my mind, like you were saying. I'm always in my thoughts. A lot of us spend most of our day in our thoughts. We're not even maybe connected with the body, like I was sharing, that has a heart rate that's shifting and changing, whose breath is changing, whose muscles are tensing or relaxing, all based on, again, information about how we're perceiving our environment. So if we're not tuning into that, we're leaving out a whole bunch of the story. So the more consciously aware I am, the more connected I can then be to my body. Now I have, in that space that I was just talking about, opportunities to make intentional choices. When I discovered that my nervous system was dysregulated, which simply just means it was responding to a threat in my environment, even if there wasn't a threat objectively present, then on that foundation of consciousness, what I would do is I would begin to make choices to help calm my nervous system, to do some deep belly breathing or a grounding practice, which really just means, I used the example earlier of turning my attention to how it feels to be in a body, grounded or supported.
Even when you
by
were
the
saying
earth.
that, I started doing that, and I was like, oh, that feels good. I like
Yes.
taking this deep breath right now. I like being
Yes.
grounded. I like feeling my arms on the chair. Okay, I'm here, right
Yes.
here, right now. Less in my head, more present, more in the moment. It's beautiful.
Right. And thank you for sharing that, Orion, because the reality of it is much of what we're reacting to and is causing those fear responses or reactions in our body is not actually objectively present in the current moment. Like you're sharing, right? I might be lost in a thought about something stressful. And then if I do decide in that moment, because we always have the opportunity to choose what we're paying attention to. So if I continue to think that stressful thought, as many of us spend most of our day doing, then of course my body is going to be stressed because it's continuing to send those messages to my body. If, however, like you just shared, I was sitting here sharing about how important it is, turn your attention to your present moment. You did that. You pulled your focus away from, say, this hypothetical stressful thought, and now you had the opportunity to be present to what's here. And what's actually here in our current moment, at least, is nothing that's stressful at all. And that's why it felt, as you described it, good. And the reality of it is much of what we're reacting to does live in our head, does live in our past experiences, is being projected because something is somewhat similar to that early experience and is therefore something I want to avoid happening again. But more often than not, it's faulty. It's not accurate. And again, we're then going to react as if the stress or the threat is present, even when it's not. So that's the biggest gift we can give ourselves, is to tune into what's actually here. And many of us will notice that what is here is safe, is calm, is supportive, like the earth beneath you.
Yes. And then we can meet ourselves. What does that mean to meet yourself?
You used, and I'm going to go back to this idea of the kind of journey or the process of it. Somewhere earlier, I think you, somehow the concept, or maybe just in my own head, the word of like shedding. And I think it probably came up because I think a lot about an onion and kind of peeling the layers of an onion. And when then I created the new workbook, How to Meet Yourself, which really was born out of a desire to give, especially readers of how to do the work, though you don't have to have read the first book to grab the workbook. I wanted to give people guidance in terms of, okay, well, if I have all these habits, right, that are creating my life, let me begin to become consciously aware of them. So the workbook is separated into 3 separate sections with the goal of beginning that peeling journey, becoming conscious first, and then first becoming conscious of, because it's so important, like we've been talking about, our body. What is our body? What are the messages our body? What is our nervous system reacting to in the moment? Once we become present to my body and the trauma that's living there, then the next layer I can peel back is my conditioning, all the thoughts in my mind, this ego story that I've created, this idea of who I think I am, based on, more often than not, how I've had to fit in, not who I am at all, like we were talking about, not my identity, though more based on my habits. And once I become present then to all of the mental conditioning that's coloring my world, then like that onion, now I have the safety and the space to begin to meet myself. Because what that means is getting in contact with the true me, what I really think, not what I'm saying because I think that's what someone wants to hear. What am I really feeling? What is my perspective? What is my need? What is my want? That is myself that I'm trying to meet. So many of us we have habits in those areas. We're saying what we think others want to say. We're suppressing our emotions because it wasn't safe in our childhood. We don't even stop to ask ourselves what we want or what we need because we're so worried about what everyone else wants or needs from us. So this is where I think I frustrate people often, where there isn't a 1, 2, 3 steps of meeting yourself, because it really is that journey of first being witness to what we're not. All of the conditioning that, again, was an adaptation, once was my survival mechanism, no longer has to be. And then I have space to rediscover who it is that I am. And that for each of us is a really individual journey, because in my opinion, that's the beauty of humanity. We're all uniquely different. That's the goal here, is to be uniquely us, because when we join together as unique individuals, what happens is we join together and we become a stronger group, because chances are, have strengths in areas that might not come as easily or naturally to you or Ryan, and you might have strengths in areas, or I know you do, that don't come easily or naturally to me. And now together, right, we have strength in more areas.
Yes, it seems like so many people are trying to be like so many people. Even externally, there is one celebrity, and then all the young girls want to look like her, and everybody wants to look like something that, not everyone, but a lot of people are thinking that if they will look or act like somebody that they're not, they will be somehow better than who they are, and it's diminishing their gifts and talents, like you said.
There's so much wisdom in there, and it's really driven, what you're sharing very wisely here is really driven by our evolution. Because to survive, I think often about just humans in general, and the different contexts and climates and communities we've really evolved from. And the reality of it is we need it to band together with other supportive people in villages or in clans or whatever we want to call it, to keep us safe, to make sure that all of the things that needed to do to upkeep a community, right, were being done. And so ultimately there is a risk to our survival if we're not able to join together, right? If there isn't any village that wants me a part of it, if I can't fit in, if I can't get along with other people, then my survival is actually at risk. So what that now translates to is comparison. We are seeking in some way, or we are externally motivated, because fitting in is integrally important. It's wired. We need those relationships. We needed them at one time, quite literally, to survive. Now, however, we have a social media landscape. We have endless amount outside of even celebrities, right? We have even just people up the block who we might know their account, and we get to watch what they're posting and curating now on social media. So I share the evolution behind a lot of this, because I think these are behaviors where, especially if we see them in ourselves, and we might even have well-meaning loved ones that are like, well, you're just doing this to yourself. You're just making yourself feel bad. Stop doing it. So this is a moment where we don't necessarily have to shame ourselves. The tendency to compare ourselves with other people and to try to modify ourselves in ways because we perceive them as being more successfully connected or living the life we want, that's natural. However, we can begin to create more space to honor our uniqueness. So I think a lot about shame and compassion, the other side of shame, throughout the healing journey, because a lot of what keeps us stuck is that shameful inner voice, is the idea that we shouldn't be feeling or experiencing something that is quite natural. If there wasn't safety and security, we will adapt. That is what our body will do. Right? We will have the tendency to make sure that we're fitting in with our community because we need to survive. We don't have to shame those moments, though if we're doing them to our own detriment, or if it's not, creating the habits that we want, then we can absolutely create change.
Right. Without shaming, modeling is a great thing. When you model someone who is more successful or powerful, it's because you want to become more like them, because you're driven to improve your future self. modeling that comes from the intention to be good enough because you feel like you're not good enough. Therefore, you are trying to push your own self aside just to look like somebody else. This is, I think, toxic modeling. It's not modeling that serves oneself. I think it comes down to what's the intention of modeling.
Yeah. What you're kind of hammering down into is what I think a lot about is the choice we make, the thing we do, right? Looking, observing, comparing to someone else. I might just label that as that's an objective thing. We're either doing it or not doing it, right? The intention, the why, like you're saying, what is the reason or the purpose, that would then shift or change whether or not it's a functional or an adaptive, something I want to continue because it's motivating me in this circumstance, or whether or not it's something that's dysfunctional, making me feel worse, more unworthy. So I couldn't agree more. I think all actions I apply the same kind of thought to all actions. They're objective, right? Whether I'm doing the thing, eating the thing, consuming the thing is objectively just what's happening. Whether or not it becomes an issue for me is why am I doing that? Am I doing it because I don't feel like I have any other choice? Am I doing it because this is the only way I can feel better about myself? Then we might want to give ourselves other choices. I just want to add a third example of something that commonly happens in this kind of when I'm comparing to other people. A third scenario, which I think is somewhat confusing and occurred to me when you were talking about dancing earlier. Because for me, for a very long time on social media, I think it was even known, TikTok, right? The dancing app when it first came out. I know it's evolved beyond that. But for me, it was a real pain point. When I would see other people, maybe much like yourself, right? If you were to video yourself in one of these classes, I would cringe, my skin would crawl. And I would actually think and sometimes say negative, judgmental things about the woman, say, who I saw dancing. Why did I have such a strong, angry even, tearing down, right, reaction of, why are you dancing? You shouldn't, right? The reason I've come to uncover for me and what elicits that more negative reaction sometimes is because there was a deep part of me in childhood that desperately wanted to dance. I actually took dance lessons until I, having a little bit bigger of a belly than most other girls in my dance class. I had to wear a leotard until I was always put in the back row because I wasn't the best dancer. And at the same time, I was succeeding and achieving in sport. So before long, I felt bad in my body. I wasn't getting celebrated by my mom. The only main way she knew how to connect with me was celebrating my achievements, being softball being one of them or sports being one of them. So before long, I stopped dancing. And then into adulthood, I watched other people dance and I ridiculed them. I criticized them because that's another scenario I just want to offer is when we are comparing, sometimes what we're reacting so strongly and negatively to is something that actually is inside of us. It's a deep one. It's a deep passion. It's a deep need that I might not be feeling safe enough to express on my own. So what feels safer is to tear the person down who's doing it, to roll eyes or to shame someone else, as opposed to saying, hey, this is making me uncomfortable because there's something in your freedom. That's what it was for me, the freedom of being in your body and expressing and allowing the emotions, much like music and kind of dancing can do. It can be medicine. It can be healing, right? That to me didn't occur to me. All I saw was the discomfort that I felt not having that freedom in my own body and my own emotional expression.
Yes. Wow. That's powerful. So we build this, not all of us, and I think actually all of us to some extent have some kind of false identity. How can we crack through that false identity that is, I am what I'm wearing, I am who I associate with, I am the money I have in the bank, when we are in truth just source energy, unique snowflakes, beautiful radiant light, but we have this false identity. How do we find our true self?
Going back to those two very simplified steps of changing, of discovering, right, our true self, or our true identity. And the first step, as I cited it, right, was becoming conscious. Before I can, change, expand into, embrace this unique snowflake being of infinite potential that I am, right, I have to become conscious of what I think I am first. I have to see this identity. I have to see what, for many of us, the identity lives in our ego, right? Anytime our mind is thinking or we're speaking or we're affirming, right? I'm this kind of person. I'm not this kind of person, right? We give ourselves the label, beginning to pay attention, whether or not it's coming out of our mouth to someone else or just living in our mind. Anytime that we are speaking to ourselves or someone else about our identity is a great place to begin to pay attention, because chances are, like you were sharing, I do agree, the large majority of us are operating with a kind of habitually learned identity, like we were talking about earlier, an identity that was born more out of how I had to be to show up, less out of who I really am. So we have to see that identity present first. And like I said, we can see it in our speech when we're actually talking about ourselves, and we can see it in our mind's eye when we're kind of narrating our life. And until we begin to see what identities who we think we are, right, then we're never going to be able to drop into the reality that we are even beyond that. So beginning to pay attention, beginning to notice when it is that we are using that I word, and beginning to pay attention to the themes, because chances are you'll start to see in your mind's eye or in your speech kind of your narrative kind of being created based on the themes in which you are speaking about yourself. And then chances are you can probably kind of go back in time if you can recall your childhood, or, kind of figure out more or less why it is or how it is that you came to feel that way. And then ultimately, though, giving yourself the opportunity to try on new ways of being, because that's how we developed who it is that we are. We've had to adapt very consistent ways to very consistent circumstances. And then before we know it, that became that internal narration of who we are.
Do you believe in God?
I believe, similar to how you're even describing kind of human, I believe in a source energy, absolutely, of which I believe we are all connected, unique beings in extension of. God is one of those tricky ones, I think, for a lot of us, especially if we came through or were, kind of in a religious institution. So even when you asked me that, I thought, oh, wow, it's been a while since I've been so directly asked. And there was a part of me that went back in time
It's really pretty direct.
to the idea of God, though, that I learned in my Catholic religion, right?
Right.
Which for me doesn't resonate any longer, though I absolutely resonate with a God, a universal source being, like I said, of which we are all interconnected. But there was a part of me that was like, well, God, what do you mean? But no, I do, just not that being or that narration of God that I was taught. And this isn't to kind of downgrade or talk badly about any religion. I've learned for myself to distinguish between spirituality and religious. And for me, spirituality is much more resonating. And that's, again, the way that I make sense of it. That allows me to feel connected then to even the inanimate world of, plants and animals, because I believe that we are all unified through that energetic connection.
So how do we connect to source energy and play in the quantum field so we can manifest our destinies?
I love this question. It's a great one. So we have to be in that pure space. I believe we're all born as children, those of us who, are around children or who have children. Just thinking even about a child, right? They say what's on their mind. They express themselves exactly as they are. Their feelings are on their sleeve until, of course, then the environment begins to create opportunities or a need for them to modify. So even just like we were talking about earlier, that journey of unlearning, of deconditioning, of pulling those layers of that onion back, what that then lets me to have that space to do is to connect with that pure energy inside of me, is to drop into. And so the way we can connect is create moments where we are able to just be connected to ourself in solitude or ourself in nature, quieting down our thinking mind, like you were talking about earlier. We spend way too much time in that, and learning how to communicate with our energetic bodies, not necessarily just listening, right, for the thought of what to do next, learning all of the other ways that our intuition, in my opinion, communicates with us. Some of us, it's visual, it's sensations, right? It might be even auditory sounds or phrases that pop in. Though most of us are seeking the repetitive nature of our thinking mind, and we're not giving ourselves any opportunity to even explore this deeper energetic connection. Though, again, to be clear, until we feel safe in our body, until our nervous system is regulated enough, until I'm not listening to my ego-driven story, shifting into reactivity, right? That onion process we were talking about, then I won't feel safe enough to even settle into silence, to begin this exploration. So it really is a journey back into reconnecting with our own source energy in those moments.
Did you have any spiritual experiences where you saw signs where you were connected to the field?
On a daily.
On a daily, I like
now
that.
Now that I'm open and aware, I pay attention to, moments where pings happen, messages come, things kind of indicate from external sources. So for me, it's being just more connected to myself, having more moments of grounded presence, even just operating now with that awareness that we are actually connected to more than just ourselves as individuals. And for me, that was one of my deepest wounds. Coming from a home where there was little to no emotional connection, there was physical proximity, though there was a lot of, for me, the predominant feeling that comes to mind is aloneness. There was a deep-rooted feeling that I was alone, I would always be alone, and there was a pain around that aloneness. So really shifting that belief, not just telling myself I shouldn't think that, shifting it in action, right? Learning how to be more connected to myself so I can have moments of feeling connected, not only to other human individuals, but the world around me has then allowed me to be able to so assuredly say, oh yeah, I have moments daily where because I'm open, because I'm present, because I believe I'm connected to these messages and these signs that I do now see them.
How do you form a new belief going from I'm alone to I'm not alone? What's the process?
This is an incredibly important question because a lot of us believe that beliefs can change by just telling ourselves to think somehow different or affirming, right? This is where I think for a lot of us, we give affirmations a really bad rap because realistically they don't work. If we don't believe we're worthy, and if we just write on a Post-it note, put it in front of the mirror that we look at every day that says I'm worthy, right? Just mindlessly recite that to ourselves and change nothing else in our day, it's not going to work. I will be perfectly honest that chances are that moment of time when you just said, even for consistent days, months even, I'm worthy, if nothing else has changed in action, if you've not showed up in an action of worthiness, because that's what beliefs are. They are repeated thoughts, but they're repeated thoughts that are grounded in our lived experience. So if you're affirming that I'm worthy and then traveling about the rest of your day and in action treating you as an unworthy individual or allowing your relationships to treat you in unworthy ways, then that affirmation won't work. So it's about changing not only our thoughts in our mind by offering that we are worthy, but by actually teaching ourselves how to show up in that action.
How do I action I am worthy? Or how do I action I am not alone?
Alone, worthiness, right? All of that is built in the foundation, first and foremost, of presence, right? To feel not alone, we are in presence of someone. That someone is me, right? So learning how to reconnect, not just mindlessly distract ourselves in our thoughts through life or worrying about other people, actually showing up in worry of ourselves to build our worthiness, in action of taking care of my physical body in the way that my body needs to be cared for and making space for my emotions, regardless of what everyone else around me is thinking or feeling or wanting or doing. It's being in my own presence, attuning to my own needs that will help me then feel less lonely. And at the same time, it will build a case that I actually am worthy of someone showing up for them because I am. Because in action now, I'm beginning to take care of my body. I'm beginning to make space for my emotions. I'm hitting pause and not just doing or saying what I think you want of me. I'm actually pausing to, like I described earlier, drop in and ask myself what I want or what I need. And the more consistently that in action we show up in those ways, now I can't help but not feel a little less lonely because I'm not alone anymore. I'm with me. I'm with me. And not only that, I have my own back. I'm acting as if I'm worthy. So that's how over time we actually shift beliefs.
Maybe making a list of what will make me feel not lonely. I am not lonely when I am like things that will show one that they're not lonely or that they are worthy. I will feel worthy when somebody smiles at me. I will feel worthy when I take a shower. I will feel worthy when I put on nice clothes or put makeup on. Little things like that. And when you start seeing it in the little things, you can manifest bigger and more important things that will show you how worthy you are. And then you go back to nothing external needs to make me feel worthy. I am worthy just because I am. And I am is connected to source energy.
And I want to say something too about the kind of smallness that you're describing here. I would actually suggest that going about it, like you're saying, in small ways. In my global membership, the Self-Healer Circle, we talk about a concept that I call the small daily promise. And it's really capitalizing on what you're describing here. There's actually benefit in taking the slow approach. We don't want to do that, right? Especially when we're in the depth of suffering. And the reason why we
wants
change
the grandiose, dramatic change.
Is because we can't imagine, right, life going on like this. So logically, the quicker I do, right, and overhaul my life and, in terms of worthiness, okay, great. Well, I'm going to do 10 new things to convince myself that I'm worthy starting tomorrow, because then that'll just get me to feeling worthy quicker. However, again, going back to a concept we talked about in the beginning, the reason why we're stuck is because of those subconscious habits. And our subconscious actually prefers to live within the ruts of those habits, because what happens next is predictable. So it'll feel safer. So anytime we go out of those confines of safety and we take one new step and we take one step in a new direction, that's going to challenge our subconscious. It's going to set an alert up that what could be in this now unknown space, because I've never done this before, it's new, might be a threat, let alone taking 5 new steps in a different direction. So I could make a case and do in the membership, the Self-Healer Circle, that there's great benefit of going slowly, of making one commitment, or keep making a list and keeping the commitment to make that one promise each and every day, because it will feel difficult. You won't immediately feel worthy once you do that new thing, taking the shower or whatever it is that you've, intended to do. It won't immediately translate into worthiness, the feeling, though what will is the consistent keeping of that promise. So my parting words on this topic are really how important it is to go slow. We don't want to, because we think that we'll feel better quicker, though what we're really looking here for is habit change. Habits happen when we consistently take those new actions.
Absolutely. Just like when you go to the gym, you don't want to just go run 10 miles when you're not a runner. You have to take it slow, and you have to do it every day to keep in shape. So it's not a one and done. You have to repeat and create the habit, small steps, and you get stronger, bigger, taller, all of the good stuff. What is your membership about, and why did you, I'm sure you built it to help a lot of people, and can you tell me a little bit about it? What is it about, and how do people participate in that?
The membership was actually an idea, that came on my own healing journey. Coming to really become aware, that first step for me. I saw all of the different relationships and communities that I had been ever involved in. Social being, always lived in cities, always had, kind of an active time with other people. However, what I started to see is how infrequently I was me when I was with other people. I was always watering down myself. I was never really sharing my opinions or how I really felt or what I really wanted or what I really needed, always in fear of how the other person would react, disappointing them not wanting to stay connected to me or in a relationship with me. So as I began to see that and on my own healing journey, the inspiration, actually before even the circle came to be, the membership for the account itself was really an action in my own journey at that time. Seeing social media and the way different people were using it, I saw it as a possible space for me to begin to experiment. How is it? Can I begin to be me, walk through all of that discomfort and fear? Because it was all there behind the scenes of judgment, of disappointment, of what would people think? And can I teach myself to say it anyway, to share myself and my journey anyway? And I was met with a community of people from around the world who were resonating with aspects of my journey because they had similar experiences. They were shifting and changing in the same ways. So the byproduct of that now was that little lonely girl that I was sharing about earlier that was convinced, right, for a lifetime of aloneness, because though I was always around people, I was the embodiment of that saying, alone in a crowded room. Didn't matter who I was with, who I was dating, what type of relationship I was in, I always had that hole inside of me. Why? Because I wasn't me. I was disconnected. I wasn't actually in a relationship with anyone around me because I was never showing my true self, to anyone around me. So having done that and having had the safety then of just people using the self-healer hashtag, which I started to put under my initial post in the community that would gather together under my post on the Instagram account, it became really clear to me how powerful community is and how many people there were around the world, much like myself, who were desperately wanting these safe communities or containers to begin to explore this work, have these conversations, and connect with other individuals on the same journey. And so I started to hear direct requests of, is there any way we can do this off of social media? And it got me thinking of, I was doing individual client work at that time. My caseload, was I had a waiting list. People were waiting to have individual sessions with me. And at the same time, I was understanding how important other relationships were going to be for everyone on their journey. So for me, it was a natural and intuitive then next step to think about, okay, can I create now this into a membership for individuals who want a little bit deeper of a dive, a little bit more of a direction around certain topics, and who want that community away from social media? Because what I started to see and hear was people had family members that were following the account, and people were not wanting to speak as honestly because of who might see, and it's understandable. It's a public platform. So for me, that's how the circle was born. And now it's almost about 4 years old. It's evolved a ton. We have our own private membership portal now. It very much looks like a Facebook. It's not connected with any social media, where members have profile pages in addition to obviously monthly content and workshops and live events that happen throughout the month. There is that social engagement, that safe community. And again, it was all born out of the need for all of us as humans to have safety in our relationships and in our environments so that we can actually, and that first environment can begin with each of us as individuals in our relationship with ourselves so that we can actually create healing and change.
And that's so beautiful that out of your own pain, you created so much togetherness for a lot of lonely people and help them find themselves. That's beautiful.
Yeah, I think one of the most valuable aspects too is not even the content that we put out, the workshops that we put out. It is the community. It is the living, breathing other people where members will post and not even want feedback from anyone on the team. They want to hear from other people who get it. And I'm just like all of us as individuals. There is so much healing I get sharing my journey, hearing members sharing, reading their shares in our portal of their own journeys, and I get to also feel less alone. So it's very much an active part of my own healing still, is how can I be me while I'm connected and in relationship, not just with my partners in my private life, but with humanity. Because again, we are all wired to come together in a global collective, and I'm so hopeful as I continue to see, as much as we talked about social media in the beginning, right, being this context, this point of comparison, I'm really hopeful with the resources and the communities and the tools and the access, in particular, that it can provide so many of us, because so many of us are living in, countries, in neighborhoods that don't have access to these resources, to helping professionals, or to these conversations.
Yes, that's pretty awesome. And with great exposure and great success like you have, what about trolls online? What about people, the naysayer, the people that try to bring you down because you looking at you is probably hitting their own personal trauma, and so they will put a lot of judgment on you. How do you deal with all that?
I'm giggling, Orion, a little behind the scenes. I was having a giggle actually with Furkan, who needed me for some camera thing. And I thanked him in that moment because I was on my phone and I was getting ready to do a doom stress scroll down exactly stressful content. So the reality of it is, and again, as much as I did fear that, the contention, the disagreement, people just not agreeing with the fact that I'm a psychologist talking about my own personal life, which I know in the field has been something we were trained out of doing.
How dare you think differently?
While, I think differently, share yourself as a human. I mean, I understand the clinical theory behind that, though in practice and with humans that I've worked with, I think most humans want to interact with another human, but that's a conversation for a different time. Though that aside, the fear of what will people think was huge when I first went online. And I do want to share that because I think a lot of people, especially now that I'm as visible as I am, assume that there must not ever have been fear, right? That I was excited about this level of exposure, and I wasn't. I was more afraid of what people would think than I was welcoming the visibility. There is still a very big part of me internally that fears this level of visibility because of the judgment that comes with it. But saying all that to say, the support has been overwhelming, though of course there are people who have all different types of negative reaction to my work. It is ever present. How I deal with it is, how I deal with most things. It's not to say when someone gives me feedback that makes me uncomfortable that I just, disagree with it immediately. I absolutely listened to all of the different types of feedback that I've heard from all of the different types of people that have shared it, because we are really limited in our perspective. Much like a horse with blinders on it, it's taken someone else maybe sharing really difficult aspects about myself for me to begrudgingly say, oh gosh, I see that too now. I didn't want to see, right, those aspects of myself, though I'm able to see what you're saying. So this isn't me to say, because I don't think it's all feedback is bad. I think feedback, especially from trusted, right, individuals who've spent time enough with you to have this vantage point, can actually help us remove the blinders and see something that we are not able to see ourselves. So with that said, I've heard and read all of the different types of feedback, and I've given myself the opportunity to try it on, right? To have those difficult moments of, okay, could someone else's perception or reality be reflecting something I can't see? And of course, then I have supportive people that, I go and have conversations with in my personal life. And in those moments, then if I come to the, realization for myself that this might not be as much about me. Like we were talking about earlier, all the different things that elicit reactions from people. It might be the newness of my message. It might be that I'm touching something that's causing you to, feel unfamiliar, challenging something deeper in you. Whatever it might be, I can, what I call, depersonalize that. I can still hold space for the validity of your perspective, of what you think, of how you're feeling, of even how you're expressing it, of course, within safe boundaries. And at the same time, I can stay affirmed in my own truth, in my own certainty, in my own self. So that's not to say I've learned over time to use boundaries, to create, if there are actions that are like creating dysregulation, if people are overwhelming or saying abusive things, which can happen sometimes when someone's activated, I can keep myself safe by using boundaries, by ending the conversation, by hitting block if it is feeling threatening enough. So that's my responsibility, as is when Furkan, thank you, caught me doom scrolling, because that's another, right? I know where criticism lives. I fear, right? The little child inside of me, like we've been talking about, fears criticism. I don't like people not liking me. I don't like people having different opinions than me. I'm used to always watering myself down, right? That inside of me part is still there. And in moments where I'm already feeling stressed or overwhelmed, or I haven't been sleeping well, or I have a lot on my plate, in terms of work obligations or whatever it might be, those are the moments where that wound comes alive. And much like today, where that wound wants to validate itself. And I want to go scroll the trolls, and I want to affirm that I'm just as mean and terrible and no good as I fear, or as we've talked about, unworthy, as I fear myself to
And
be.
that what
So
do you
I
do?
share this.
What do you do at that moment?
I share this because I think, again, it's not, I can say all of these things, right? Keep yourself protected, depersonalize. It's not about me.
But
It's
sometimes
about
we get hurt,
them.
right?
And it's still there, right? I'm still like knee deep in getting ready to go down something that's going to be stressful for me. So I can only do what we can all do, which is hold myself consciously accountable in those moments. Like we were talking about earlier, ask myself, when Furkan said, hey, I need you for a minute, I had the moment of saying, do I really want to continue this scroll when he doesn't need me anymore? And the answer was no. I threw my phone, I was available, and I shifted knowing that I had a podcast. I don't want to be in a stressed out state. I know it's there. I don't have to contribute to my dysregulation by engaging with it. So I can, in action now, right, show up in protection of myself and in a way that feels better for me. But it doesn't mean that all that temptation isn't there. And it doesn't mean that on occasions, I don't keep scrolling. I don't keep dysregulating myself and upsetting myself, affirming that I'm unworthy.
Yes, thank you for sharing that in such a vulnerable and real way. That's awesome. I'm just reading Dr. Ben Hardy's book, Be Your Future Self Now, and he's talking about the people that are in the arena and the spectators, and how in our societies there is just enough glamour to be or glory in being a spectator than in being the actual player in the field. And he quoted somebody, I can't remember, but he said something like, never take advice for somebody who's not willing to switch places with you. Or so that's for me, it was so profound. So easy to listen to the spectators, the people that are not actually doing that, fighting for their for their greatness, fighting for their contribution, so playing the big game in the arena, and the the players never go and watch games and listen to the people that narrate the game, because it's not for them. They're in the field, they're playing, and that's what's important.
Yeah, I'm also thinking too how, and again, the reason why I so readily and freely share of my own journey, oftentimes we don't even take our own advice, right? That's why I share the behind the scenes, right? I can sit here and say all of the steps. In doing the steps is where we meet. And I do think it is important for all of us who are living or making choices that are more visible, right? Living more publicly or in the arena, like you're saying. I do think it is important to continue to be, honest with the whole experience of it, which means that it doesn't come without fear or moments where I don't feel worthy or I'm unsure of why people are even looking at me in the arena. Because again, I do think, and I've heard directly from people, this assumption that must not be the case because of what's being projected outward or even projected onward, right, if you will. And the reality of it is a continued struggle. It's a negotiation between the wound inside of me that's so fearful of all that's going to happen if I'm just who I really am, and the whole beautiful, limitless being that's connected to source that knows that I can continue to show up in a different, more expanded way, though not without all the difficulty of building that bridge in from insight into that action.
Yes, and if we imagine our brain as like a jungle, if the path of trauma was open and then you move away from it and you open the path of self-love, and then the more you are in that path of self-love, it's like that path is growing bigger and the path of trauma is shrinking and shrinking and shrinking until one day you wake up and you're like, it's not there. It doesn't even bother me. I'm good. I know who I am, and this is amazing, and I'm grateful for who I am, and I'm connected to source, and I'm helping a lot of people, and that's pretty damn good.
Oh, it's incredible, and it's transformative. And what you're describing is, the reality of our human mind and our human body, which is that it can change. You actually can create a new jungle, a new pathway, however it is that you want to visualize it, at any age, right? How hopeful that message can be. Once, of course, many of us get over, as I once had to, the internalized idea or belief that it's not for us, right? Oh, that's great. That might be for Dr. Nicole, this new jungle, this new path, but it's not for me. And again, I want to share very honestly, I was that person. I would read about crazy life-changing, experiences that people had, new lives they've created for themselves. And I wouldn't necessarily criticize or tear them down or even talk badly about them. I'd say, oh, good for you, but won't happen for me. However, again, that back to that neuroplasticity and the hope, the reality of it is it can happen. It might not be your belief just yet, right? Because you haven't been able to create change. You haven't been able to maintain new consistent actions that allows you to feel differently or believe differently over time. And when you begin to string together those new small promises, then you will live that experience. And in my opinion, nothing is a greater teacher than us teaching ourselves by gifting ourselves even a new experience.
Yeah, it's beautiful. And if you're listening to this right now, that's a sign that you're destined for greatness, and there is a rhyme and a reason to why you are listening to this right here, right now, sitting or laying down or wherever you're listening to it, because your future is beautiful and bright, and as long as you believe in it and connect to that, you will manifest it, right?
So beautiful.
Can you please share with me your 3 top tips to living a stellar life?
Yeah. So I think we kind of covered them throughout. My number 1 top tip is always a stellar life begins in presence, in that conscious state of awareness. So become present, make that choice like you did, right? Focusing our attention in what is here and what is now. That is the foundational tip of living, in my opinion, a stellar life. In that shift of attention and focus, another tip for living a stellar life is create that space that we've been talking about. Learn the difference between the habits, right, that have maybe I've come to identify with, and that limitless being inside. When we create that separation, we open that door a little more for that possibility of that stellar life. And the final tip, again, I believe to be true as always, is everything, right? The intuition, the purpose, the passion, that inner knowing is inside. So as we become more connected, peeling of all of those onions, I think we become and live, I think we live a stellar life because we become who we are. And in my opinion, we are all stellar. We're limitless. We're a beautiful being that will never have a similar, energetic expression, anytime, any place. We are us. And in my opinion, that makes us stellar just by inherently being. So when we can create that space to just be as we are, we naturally live a stellar life because that's who we are.
Thank you. Thank you for those beautiful words. Where can the people find you, Dr. Nicole LePera, and get your books and maybe join the circle?
Thank you for having me, Orion. Thank you for having this podcast and all these incredible conversations. And thank you all for listening. At this point, however, whatever social media it is that you prefer to consume your content, we have an account across Instagram where it all began, TikTok, YouTube, a new Twitter account. So however it is that you like to consume content, you can type in the Holistic Psychologist and find the handle there. For more information on the Self-Healer Circle, you can check out selfhealercircle.com or theholisticspsychologist.com to jump on our email list and just stay connected with all things at the Holistic Psychologist.
Thank you, Dr. Nicole. I really appreciate you.
Thank you again for having me.
And thank you, listener. Remember to be present, connect to the limitless being inside of you, because everything is inside of you. Remember that and have a stellar life. This is Orion. Till next time.